She walked into the interview poised, qualified, and more than prepared. But the way they looked at her, as if she didn't belong, what they didn't know was that her husband had just bought the company, and he was watching everything. Renee Carson wasn't new to this world. At 43, she carried herself with a quiet strength shaped by 2 decades in strategic marketing. She had more composure than most executives, twice her salary, and second-guessing herself wasn't something she often did. But that morning, as she sat parked in the underground garage of a sleek, glass-paneled building in downtown Austin, her hands lingered on the steering wheel a moment longer than usual. She took a deep breath, picked up her leather folder, smoothed the lapels of her navy blazer, and stepped into the elevator. Her heels echoed with confidence across the marble floor. Her resume was solid, her references stellar. This wasn't just a job interview, it was a restart. Renee had stepped away from her career nearly 2 years earlier to care for her ailing father. Now she was ready to return, not cautiously, not quietly. She was ready to dive back in at full speed. The front lobby was clean but sterile. White walls, sharp lighting, abstract art that looked expensive but felt meaningless. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman with a flawless ponytail and a powdered face, whose eyes scanned Renee like she was an unexpected guest at a private party. "Good morning," Renee said with a warm smile. "I'm here for a 10 a.m. interview with Elaine Beckman." The receptionist blinked, a bit thrown by her friendliness. She tapped a few keys, glanced at her screen, then hesitated. "You're Renee Carson?" "Yes." A pause, then a faint nod before she picked up the phone, her voice dropping into a hushed whisper as her eyes never left Renee. After a brief exchange, she set the phone down and forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Someone will be right out." Renee thanked her and sat on a gray bench near the glass wall. She checked her watch. 9:52. Early as always. The lobby was still. No other candidates. No chatter of staff. Just quiet and cold air. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. At 10:07, a tall man in a slate gray suit stepped through a frosted glass doorway. He didn't look at her right away. When he finally did, his expression flickered with surprise, as if he'd been expecting someone else. "Renee Carson?" "Yes," she said, rising. "I'm Devin Marks, Director of Marketing. I'll be sitting in with Elaine today." No handshake, no welcome. Just a turn and a motion down the hall. Renee followed him in silence. No small talk. No, "How was your drive?" Just the sound of his rubber-soled shoes squeaking on polished tile. In the meeting room, Elaine Beckman sat behind a laptop, glasses low on her nose. She didn't stand. "Let's begin," she said flatly. Then the questions started. Fast, abrupt, off-tone. "Are you sure this is the role you applied for? How familiar are you with client-facing technology? Have you worked in an office this size before? Why the 2-year employment gap?" There was something behind their words. It wasn't curiosity, it was condescension. Thinly veiled doubt disguised as inquiry. When Renee mentioned handling international accounts, Elaine arched an eyebrow. "International? From where exactly?" "Singapore, Toronto, Frankfurt." 15 minutes in, Devin shut his notebook. "Actually, it looks like there's been a miscommunication," he said. "This position was filled internally last night. Apologies for the inconvenience." Before she could respond, Elaine added, "We'll keep your resume on file." That was it. They stood. No handshake. No thank you. Just a subtle nod toward the door. Renee walked back to the lobby. The receptionist was already on the phone, pretending not to see her. The elevator opened. She stepped in, alone. No parting words. No goodbye. But what they didn't realize was that someone upstairs had seen everything. Meanwhile, on the 10th floor behind a wall of tinted glass, Julian Maris hadn't moved since the receptionist picked up the phone. He saw the subtle shift in her face, the way Devin adjusted his tie when he first spotted Renee. He heard every word through a live audio feed streaming into the observation suite. 3 days earlier, Julian had quietly acquired majority ownership of Beerford Keen & Associates. No press, no big announcement. That wasn't his style. At 47, Julian was composed in the way only men are when every room they walk into waits on their approval. Raised in Lubbock, educated in San Diego, He built his name by turning mid-sized tech firms into multi-million-dollar successes. And when he saw the numbers behind Burford Keene, along with its distinct lack of diversity and leadership, he didn't hesitate. But this wasn't just another business move. It was a test. Julian wanted to see the company for what it truly was, without the polish, the pleasantries, or the PR mask. He hadn't told anyone who Renee was. She'd offered to sit this out, but he asked her to go, just to see how they'd treat someone who didn't look like everyone else in their boardroom. Now, he had his answer. "Play back the last 2 minutes," he said calmly. A junior analyst beside him replayed the audio. Elaine's tone, Devin's indifference. That phrase, "We'll keep your resume on file." Julian said nothing at first, then turned to the control panel on the wall and pressed a button. "Have HR in my office at 11:30. The assistant on the other end of the intercom hesitated. "Which manager, sir?" "All of them." "Yes, sir." He turned back toward the city. Austin shimmered under the late morning sun. A small plane floated by in the sky. Below, traffic moved. People rushed through their day, unaware that something very different was about to unfold upstairs. In another room, two former board members sat in what was now called the Transition Lounge. They had no idea the reshuffling had already begun. Julian had spent his first 48 hours reviewing everything: emails, hiring stats, interview notes. The pattern wasn't subtle. Nearly every senior hire over the last 6 years had come from the same pool, same schools, same neighborhoods, same networks, different names, same mold. They called it culture fit. He called it comfort bias. He turned to his analyst. "Do we have camera footage from the front desk?" "Yes." "I want the full recording, audio and video, time-stamped and logged." "I'll have it in your office in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Leanne." Without another word, Julian walked out. In the elevator, he leaned against the back wall and closed his eyes. He wasn't angry, not in the way people usually are. It was more like a confirmation, a final puzzle piece snapping into place. He texted Renee, "Heading home soon. Don't go anywhere just yet." She didn't reply right away. He knew she needed a minute. He understood that. But before the elevator reached the lobby, Julian already knew one thing for sure. If they thought they could judge her with a checklist and a smirk, they were about to learn what it really looked like when the tables turned. Renee caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Lipstick unbothered, hair sleek, blazer crisp. She looked like a woman ready to close a deal. And yet somehow she felt like a ghost. 15 years in marketing, 5 award-winning campaigns, 2 Fortune 500 companies. Never, not once, had anyone questioned if she applied to the right job. Until today. She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Yes, she'd been out of the field for a while, but not out of the game. When her father's health collapsed in 2021, she dropped everything: her career, her plans, her routine. No hesitation. She managed his care like she once managed executive presentations, with precision, heart, and relentless follow-through. After he passed that winter, she took 6 months to breathe, to grieve, to remember who she was when no one needed her. Then one quiet evening over dinner, she looked across the table at Julian and said, "I'm ready." He didn't need to ask what she meant. He just reached for her hand and said, "Then go get what's yours." So she did. For 3 weeks straight, Renee overhauled her resume, updated her portfolio, and practiced mock interviews with old colleagues. She read industry reports till her eyes blurred, researched firms with momentum, and made a shortlist. At the top, Burford Keene. But it was clear now. They hadn't seen her. Not really. She thought about Julian's words the night before. "I know what you're worth." You know what you're worth. The room either sees it or it exposes itself. Either way, we win. She'd smiled when he said it, thinking he was just trying to boost her confidence. But maybe he was planning something. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. "Heading home soon." Don't go anywhere just yet. No punctuation. That meant he was focused. Serious. She thought about calling him. Maybe sending a half-laughing, half-frustrated, "You were right." But she didn't. Something told her this wasn't over. Not yet. She reached for her notebook in the passenger seat, flipping to the inside cover. 4 words in her own handwriting stared back at her. Your presence is power. She closed it slowly, sat still for one more breath, then turned the engine on, backed out of the parking space, and eased into traffic. No rage, no tears. Just the kind of stillness you feel before the weather shifts. What Renee didn't know was that, across town, other people were starting to shift too. 10th floor, Barford Keene headquarters. Devin Marks was halfway through a tuna sandwich when his phone buzzed. A notification from internal communications. Mandatory HR meeting. 11:30 a.m. Boardroom. He frowned. Checked the sender. Then the time. Elaine, he called down the hall, still chewing. You get that meeting invite? Further down, Elaine Beckman was adjusting her blouse in a window reflection. She didn't even turn. Yeah, about 10 minutes ago. No idea what it's for. Probably merger paperwork. Devin shrugged. Probably nothing. HR meetings came and went. Compliance stuff. Survey results. No big deal. But behind a locked door just a few floors above, a very different kind of meeting was already underway. Julian stood silently at the corner of the boardroom, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Beside him, Leanne, the junior analyst. Across the room, 2 HR directors, Rosa Levington and Martin Cross. They looked like they'd walked into a fire drill no one had warned them about. Do they know? Julian asked quietly. They think it's just a procedural update, Leanne replied. He nodded. Good. At 11:28, Devin walked in. At 11:29, Elaine followed. They were laughing about a misprint in a client proposal until they saw the room. No projector, no printed agenda, just Julian. He let the silence sit there, heavy and deliberate. Elaine cleared her throat. Sorry, we weren't told what this was about. You will be, Julian said. Then he nodded to Rosa. She opened a folder. These are transcripts from this morning's interview session, specifically the 10 a.m. slot with a candidate named Renee Carson. Devin blinked. Wait, wasn't that interview canceled? It wasn't, Rosa replied. Martin added, the interview was logged, recorded, and monitored remotely as part of our new equity review policy. Elaine shifted in her chair. Are we being accused of something? You're being given the chance to explain, Rosa said evenly. Julian stepped forward. You interviewed a candidate who exceeded every listed qualification, but instead of a fair assessment, you asked if she was sure she applied to the right job, and then told her the role had already been filled. Devin stammered. We had a late internal applicant come in. After her slot had already started, Julian asked flatly. Elaine tried again. With respect, she just didn't seem like the right fit. Her background was scattered. She took a 2-year break to care for her dying father. Julian cut in. That's clearly noted on her resume. Silence. Julian stared at them both. What else didn't you see? Or more accurately, what did you see that made you decide she wasn't worth the full interview? Elaine opened her mouth, then closed it again. Julian nodded slowly. Exactly. Devin's face was flushed now. Look, it was a misread. No harm intended. Julian didn't raise his voice. Misreads happen, but not randomly. So I'll ask again, misreads happen to who? More silence. He stepped back. Here's what's going to happen. A full review of your department's hiring record is underway. Every candidate you passed on, everyone you hired, and when the leadership transition is announced next week, your names will not be on it. Elaine's head snapped up. Wait, this is personal. No, Julian said, locking eyes with her. It's structural, and I don't have time for people who confuse their bias with instinct. But while silence fell in that boardroom, Renee was already walking back through Barford Keene's front doors. Her heels echoed with quiet authority across the marble floor. This time, no sideways glances, no puzzled receptionist. A tall man in a tailored gray suit met her by the elevator. Miss Carson? Yes. Right this way. Mr. Maris is expecting you. She followed him down a different hallway, sleek, private, lined with framed awards and glowing client reviews. It smelled less like air conditioning and more like intent. Respect. They stopped outside a sunlit conference room overlooking the skyline. The door opened. Julian stood. Their eyes met. His expression softened. He wasn't sure if the fire had burned her or lit her fuse. She gave a slight nod. She was ready. Julian turned to the others seated at the table. 3 senior executives, 1 legal advisor, and Rosa from HR. Everyone, Julian began, meet Renee Carson, strategic marketing lead, 15 years of high-impact results, and, until 2 hours ago, dismissed as unfit for the very job she helped redefine. Renee didn't blink. She stepped forward. Calm, clear. I didn't come here looking for a favor, she said. I didn't need someone to see my potential. I know what I bring to the table. I don't need it validated. One of the execs nodded, scribbling something. Rosa sat quietly, listening. I stepped away from my career to care for my dying father, Renee continued, and I will never apologize for that. But I will speak up when that becomes a reason to disqualify me without a second glance. She turned to the legal representative. I know companies want to appear inclusive, but real inclusion isn't cosmetic. It shows up in moments like this, in how people are treated when no one's watching. There was a long pause. Then one of the execs, a woman named Carla, spoke. Miss Carson, I have no excuse for this morning, but I want to ask you honestly, if given the opportunity to lead here, would you take it? Renee paused, not because she didn't know, but because the moment deserved to breathe. Then she said quietly, I came here today looking for a chance. What I got was clarity. She met Carla's eyes. I don't need to work somewhere that hesitates to see me. I'm not a maybe. I'm not someone to take a chance on. I'm a proven investment. Renee's voice was calm but unshakable. Julian's mouth twitched, just barely. Not quite a smile, something quieter, prouder. Across the table, Carla Baines leaned back, impressed. Renee turned to Julian. We're good. He gave a small nod. Always. She left without glancing back. The hallway looked the same, but everything had shifted. Not because the building had changed, but because she had. But while Renee walked out stronger, Burford Keene was left scrambling to recover from what she'd revealed. The next morning, the company's internal email system lit up like a fire alarm. Subject line, leadership update and organizational shift. Most employees clicked expecting the usual PR fluff. What they got instead was a reckoning. The new CEO, Julian Maris, introduced himself not with buzzwords but with facts. No vague commitments, no long-term initiatives, just names, timelines, and immediate action. Effective immediately. The entire hiring division would undergo a full third-party audit. Recruiting authority was being handed to an external firm during the review. 2 senior department heads, Devin Marks and Elaine Beckman, were no longer with the company. By noon, tension wrapped around the HR floor like static. Doors shut, voices low, everyone whispering, What happened? Why those 2? Was it about the merger? Julian's door stayed open. He didn't believe in hiding. He made the call. Now he was here to see it through. Burford Keene had spent years branding itself as a hub of innovation, but somehow no one had noticed that the people behind the decisions all looked exactly the same. That changed now. Around 3 p.m., Carla Baines walked into Julian's office. She didn't sit. She turned it down, she said. Julian looked up from his laptop. Good. Carla raised an eyebrow. She deserves better than a rushed PR patch job, he added. Let her write her own chapter. We just handed her the ink. Carla gave a slow nod. Still, would have been good to have her. She's not gone, Julian replied. She's just not here. Across town, Renee sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, her laptop open and a draft proposal on the screen. 2 days earlier, she'd made up her mind. She wasn't going back. After that second interview, if you could call it that, she'd walked out of Burford Keene lighter than she'd felt in months. Julian hadn't begged her to take the job. He just asked, What do you want? Now she had her answer. Her own firm, her own rules, her own table, not waiting for someone else to pull out a chair. She'd already secured a few clients, contacts from her old network who had quietly checked in over the past year. Back then, she hadn't been ready. But now, she was more than ready. The business would focus on brand storytelling and consumer strategy, built with one clear mission, to amplify underrepresented voices with the power of narrative. She'd call it True North Strategies. Julian had smiled when she told him. Strong, clean, yours. The barista set a cup of coffee beside her. Here you go, Miss Carson, she said softly. On the house. Renee blinked. Sorry? My aunt told me about what happened, the barista said, almost shy. She said you handled it like a pro. Renee just smiled, took the cup, nodded once. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to turn gold. That evening, the scent of rosemary and sage lingered through the house, leftovers from the roast Julian had made earlier. Renee stood at the stove slicing lemons for tea. Behind her, she heard the clink of ice as Julian leaned against the fridge. You know, he said, when I told you to go to that interview, I wasn't testing you. I know, she replied, still slicing. You were testing them. Julian chuckled. Didn't think they'd fail that badly. Not with cameras running. That's because you still give people the benefit of the doubt, she said. She dropped the lemon slices into the simmering pot. The tea hissed. They saw what they wanted to see. That's always been the problem. People look past you and think they're doing you a favor by deciding quickly. Julian stepped closer, rested a hand on her back. You didn't flinch in that boardroom. I've never seen you that still. Still doesn't mean silent, she said.